Imagine for a second being able to freely indulge, to discard, to consume, to wound, with every evasion to consequence that would dissuade you from doing it again. You will be perfectly fine. I mean, you've lived the type of life that tells you, okay, it doesn't matter what I do, I will always be chosen. You're the type of person for whom esteem clings to like solvent-resistant inculpability. I mean, it's frustrating to everyone around you. At this point, I don't know, you would have to commit something like, I don't know, like spectacularly unforgivable, something that would require a resignation, heck, a retraction. Oh, but even then, the cultural reflex would instinctively search for context. I mean, surely, it wasn't what people are saying it was. The injured party surely bore some marginal responsibility, right? Surely they misread you. Surely you were misunderstood. You know, surely you had your reasons. Imagine knowing that regardless, your personhood would continue to trade at full value. Regardless, your entity would still bear effective currency. Now, I appreciate, guys. This is a bit of a bit of a dramatic opening. Please just bear with me. I'm trying to slowly sort of pull us into the bigger picture, okay? The bigger story. The question is not whether or not you would take this deal, okay? The question, the surrounding thesis of this video, of this review slash book discussion, the question is not whether or not you would take this deal. The question is what you would become once you do it. Because we appreciate that indeed, you know, such people do live among us. But I think what's scarier to me is that in significant proportion, there are those who ache endlessly to inhabit that station, to have that kind of privilege, to the extent, in fact, that they enable those who do. The truth is, guys, I have, at this point in my life, reached a lot of conclusions that I think many would find extreme, and one of them is the simple fact that I no longer believe that attractiveness is morally neutral. I honestly couldn't tell you what radicalized me first or further to this sentiment, my faith or the subject of this video, the book, A Picture of Dorian Gray. But I know that I've never liked the way we talk in general about attractiveness, and by extension, I've never liked the way we talk about who deserves to be committed to relationally, engaged with in long-term intimate consideration, right? As though our roles to each other as human beings are entered to based on performance indicators. And I mean that in truly every way that you could possibly imagine that I mean that. With great power comes great responsibility, as they say. And so if I can extend the logic, if I can posit the argument that attractiveness is not morally neutral because it functions as social power, and power always associates with some moral obligation, acknowledged or not, then it is honestly no wonder that people cannot talk about this property as if it's neutral, as if it is objectively impersonal, because this discussion, too often, striking a personal nerve, tells me that there's something charged about this.
It's not that we refuse to listen to the experiences of conventionally attractive people when they talk about the dark sides of pretty privilege. It's because we have listened to you that we can tell that a lot of the things that you are talking about are just pure misogyny. And unfortunately, being beautiful doesn't make you a unique target of misogyny. Every single woman on this planet has been a victim of misogyny, is still going to be a victim of misogyny, is currently a victim of misogyny, even if they're not conventionally attractive. The first dark side of pretty privilege that people love to talk about is the fact that when you're beautiful, no one deems you as intelligent enough to be taken seriously. I hate to break it to you, but the patriarchy has deemed every single woman as unintelligent, as incapable. In fact, a lot of men still engage in this very Neanderthal type of misogyny that says, man eat meat and drink beer. Woman eats sandwich lettuce and drink smoothie.
I've repeatedly observed a common irritation, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with what I'm about to describe, when attractive people articulate social discomfort. And I just want to say now, guys, like I understand it. I really do. I get the same feeling, honestly, whenever I hear people stress about not knowing what to do with or how to manage inordinate amounts of money. Like, I'm sorry, your problems are not my problems. I hear that, and I'm not even kidding, guys. I want to run a fork through my skull. It's so annoying. I don't ever want to get to a point where I'm so extremized, in my annoyance that I can't sympathize. If not that, at the very least, intellectually register what is actually being expressed. And the grievance being expressed here, in my opinion, is an aversion to not social attention, but rather the benefits of it absent interior curiosity. It's the frustration, essentially, of being reduced to surface value, of being of being desired without being known. Thankfully, I am blessed with some really good looking people in my life. Thank you guys, you know who you are, who I could ask about this, about the frustration of this experience. And what I got from them essentially is that what is often missed about superficiality is that it is indeed nauseating, even to those who benefit from it, especially when one cannot definitively regulate its affects, what it does to you, what it does for you. How repeated exposure, right, over and over again to that feedback loop of desirability subtly recalibrates your moral reflexes. You're not in all ways in control of the way people may receive you. You know, it might hurt more than you thought it would. Heck, you might enjoy being desired, being in some ways like salivated over more than you thought you would. You might indeed take more delight, take more indulgence and joy in being groveled after and desired, and let's not even lie, guys, just being outright simped for more than you're ashamed to admit, okay? And we don't need to name names, we don't need to make things personal. The point is, these things can happen and we can't always control them. So instead of reviewing this novel, instead of just explicitly taking you through the plot details and the themes from a distance, I've decided that I want to actually pull you into it. You are Dorian Gray. We meet you before the damage, before the feedback of the world has taught you how to understand yourself. You are beautiful, but not quite yet self-conscious about what beauty does. You are young, you are impressionable, you are unformed, and critically, you are untested by consequence. Then you encounter the figure who alters the trajectory of your interior life, Lord Henry. This is the corrupting interpreter. And he introduces you to a single lethal idea, that beauty is not merely a moral attribute, but a license. The portrait that anchors this narrative, right, a picture of Dorian Gray, becomes the physical instantiation of a wish that I think a lot of people carry as a desire, but they carry it tacitly. And essentially it reads like this: let the cost of my choices be borne elsewhere. Let the judgments of time, of cruelty, of excess, of indulgence be inscribed elsewhere, on a separate surface, on an isolated medium, so that I don't bear the feedback of social currency. This is not fantasy, obviously. This is modern psychology. The portrait is externalized conscience, and here Oliver Wilde's, I think, brilliant thesis is sharpened. The danger of beauty is not that it is explicitly admired, okay? We're allowed to look and find appreciation, right, in beautiful people. The danger is when we allow it to functionally delay accountability. See, the picture of Dorian Gray is not at its core an indictment of vanity. It is an examination of what happens when worth is systematically detached from responsibility. And how do we know this? Well, Lord Henry, for example, does not command Dorian explicitly to become, insufferable, right? He doesn't command Dorian to sin, to commit wicked acts. He does something, in my estimation, far more effective. He furnishes him with moral vocabulary that aestheticizes selfishness. He reframes every impulse as something that must be honored simply by virtue of its authenticity. Every impulse that Dorian happens to experience is framed as not something that needs to be disciplined, ordered, or managed, examined responsibly, no, but rather as something that demands explanation on contact simply because it is honest, okay? Simply because it's something you're feeling. It's something that you are in your truth experiencing. Desire becomes self-justifying, right? Feeling becomes authority. And the strategy is maliciously effective precisely because it does not present as overtly malevolent. In fact, it masquerades as moral sophistication. The logic unfolds as follows. Everything that you feel must be expressed, indulged, validated, and completely understood for what it is. Because of course, guys, we know to restrain the authentic self is to enact violence upon it. Suppression becomes abuse. You guys, we're in 2026. We know we cannot possibly have boundaries. This is precisely the brilliance of the twister, the brilliance of Lord Henry. He does not negate values. He destabilizes them. He introduces reasonable doubt through logic, through intellect, through rhetorical elegance, because Guys, we know he's smart. He teaches Dorian not what exactly to desire, but rather how to narrate desire in a way that renders responsibility optional. And that is the critical insight, because harm rarely ever begins with action. It begins with language. It begins with the subtle shift in implication when words no longer mean the same thing they did a decade ago, even a sentence ago. That is why, as I emphasized in my previous video, diminishing literacy is not a neutral cultural phenomenon. When people lose capacity to track meaning, when they cannot reliably follow how concepts mutate over time, they become numb to the ethical drift. We no longer notice when justification replaces explanation, when authenticity replaces accountability, and most urgently, when preference replaces obligation. Dorian does not become monstrous because he desires. Desire is not like it's a feeling, right? So it's morally neutral. Everyone feels, everyone has stuff sitting inside of them that has to come out. Dorian becomes monstrous because he learns to articulate desire in a way that every single expression becomes necessary, becomes inevitable, becomes deserved, all whilst responsibility is quietly externalized. And so what you see happening, very interestingly, is that something else is going on in parallel. Dorian is not only becoming more beautiful, he's becoming more selective. As his social currency increases, so too does his entitlement to curate his experiences. He becomes increasingly sophisticated in determining what and whom is allowed to enter his life. Indulgence is no longer discriminate. It is discriminating. And this is where the conversation of deservingness enters the relational economy. Not everyone qualifies for Dorian's attention. Not everyone is allowed to enter his inner space. Not everyone is worth the cost. Which brings us to the first relational casualty, Sibyl Vane. Understand that Dorian loves Sibyl because she performs beauty for him. She is loved not as a person, not as a human being, but as an experience. Her value to him is mediated through her capacity to enchant, to reflect something exquisite back to him. And when love disrupts her performance, sincerity fractures the entire illusion. Dorian experiences this not as grief, but as betrayal. Remarkably, Dorian becomes the victim. Guys, this is narcissism 101. And here precisely is the moral rupture. Dorian withdraws his affection, his love, his investment in Sibyl, not because she's done anything wrong, but because Sibyl is no longer useful. Guys, I've long been really unsettled by the phrase so often used to, how would I describe it? To soften relational abandonment. It goes sort of like, it's not you, it's me. I mean, it sounds so generous, it sounds so self-denying, even noble, but it leaves behind a residue that the abandoned party can't help but absorb. If truly, as you insist, that it's not me, then what did I do wrong? In truth, the phrase, in my personal opinion, conceals something a lot colder. It's basically them saying, I can't see a way that your relational use to me is worth every strain in maintaining this dynamic, is worth every strain of investment, of time, of regard, of consideration. Therefore, I'd rather completely withdraw and say that I'm the problem because I am simply not capable, no matter how hard I try to, of seeing this dynamic as anything more or less than a long-term loss. See how it presents. The speaker is obviously assuming blame rhetorically, but the wound still remains. It's still, it still really, really hurts. I mean, they insist that it's got nothing, absolutely nothing to do with what you did, and yet, suspiciously, it still feels like it does. It still feels like in some way they're lying. And that's because, yes, it isn't about anything you've done. The reason it feels like a lie is because it's sort of a lie by omission. It feels like a lie because there is some deception there. There is something not being said, and what is not being said is that it's not about what it's not about anything you have or haven't done. It's actually about who you are. It's actually a lot more painful. It's actually that this person can't stand some unchangeable quality about you, and they know that regardless of what you do or don't do, that quality is not going away. And what we're seeing here is a rejection of that unchangeable core. That's why it necessarily hurts so much. Sibyl does not stop deserving love because she has failed morally. She stops deserving love in, well, Dorian's love, because in his eyes, she no longer has the capacity to perform to his utility. She can no longer perform value, and her death, by the way, this should be stated without euphemism, is not a narrative accident. It is the logical terminus of conditional affection. When love is contingent on usefulness, disappearance becomes the only remaining grammar, which is why the whole language of deservingness, when we speak about intimacy in the modern age, should actually scare us. And that's why I have to pause here and ask about why, in so many ways, we behave as if affection is contingent on performance.
Call it what you want, but I do not believe a woman who is out of shape deserves to be in a relationship. When it comes to love, there are rules one must abide by, and the first one is love thy neighbor as you love yourself. So if you cannot love yourself enough to make sure you are physically fit, emotionally fit, spiritually fit, baby, you are not qualified to love anybody else. Feel how you want.
And I know, you guys, I appreciate that is a strong accusation to say that, most of us primarily operate that way. But I'm telling you, the way I hear the modern day language of how we speak about who is deserving, like I said, of access to relational commitment, I can't help but recoil when I hear the word deserve. I hear it all the time, over and over and over again. It scares me that we accept that language and that we accept it so unsuspiciously. For example, he's not in a stage of life where he deserves to be of someone of her caliber. I heard this one on TikTok. She's overweight. People who are overweight clearly cannot regulate themselves. So how can we expect them to regulate the more complex dynamics of a relationship with another human being? If you can't deal with yourself responsibly, how can you be trusted to deal with a husband, much less children? And so when Oscar Wilde gives us Dorian Gray, he isn't merely critiquing vanity as a superficial abstract. He is staging a moral fantasy of unearned exemption. There is a quietly circulating idea, rarely stated outright, but quietly implied, that weight and financial status function as reliable barometers of one's capacity to sustain intimacy, that these visible metrics are not merely correlated with relational competence, but actually wholly constitutive of it. But this premise, in my personal opinion, collapses when we ask the only question that matters. Is this categorically true in all cases? Obviously not. And I appreciate that. I am also, guys, I'm very green. I'm young. I haven't really experienced much, if anything, actually. There's nothing. I don't have much. My opinion doesn't hold a lot of weight. I know that. I can admit that. But I am obviously gonna give it. And I just want to say, with this, I am open to my mind being changed. I don't, at this point in time, believe that a man's financial station is a categoric reflection of his capacity to take care of me. What I consider far more diagnostically accurate is his effort, how it manifests, how it sustains itself over time, and critically, how I can witness it adapt under constraint. And even then, effort does not express uniformly. There are factors, there are variables that one cannot control: season, circumstance, structural limitation, inherited disadvantage, timing. However, and this matters deeply, if you already know how somebody else's effort expresses with you, and that expression leaves you dissatisfied, you have no moral right to proceed with that relationship under the hopeful assumption that it will change over time, that the way this person's effort expresses itself to you, manifests to you. If you think that, okay, one day it'll get better or it'll change, express differently, if that's your feeling entering a relationship, end it. I guess what I'm saying is, I don't think it's responsible to date or marry an expression of effort that you are not willing to accept as permanent. That's not hope. That is deferred resentment. If, as a woman, you know full well that the expression of effort that you are experiencing during courtship is the version that you will live with, and you are already at that point in time dissatisfied with it, respect him enough not to lead him forward, into a future where he will be eventually punished for not transforming into someone you wish he privately were. And yes, the same principle I think should apply in reverse. If you're a man, In fact, you know what? Forget the reverse. If you're a man or a woman and you hold some non-negotiable superficial standard and you know with clarity that you cannot transcend that, then your responsibility is not to moralize your preference, but to contain it. Now, my first instinct, obviously, would be to recommend re-examining the shallowness of your criterion and correcting your perspective. But obviously, I cannot legislate your interior life. What I can say is this. Do not enter into relationships with people who lack those quote unquote mandatory traits. Listen, whatever it happens to be, even if it is objectively like a superficial trait, don't enter into relationships with people who don't have those traits, knowing that you cannot get over it. Because I'm telling you, you will harm them. You will, it's just not fair. You will harm them, not hypothetically, but inevitably. They will, I guarantee you, sense the absence of full desire. They will feel tolerated rather than chosen. Contempt as an emotional state does have a frequency, and it leaks. The question, often posited to women, would you date a broke man? Okay, it pretends to be simple. Honestly, it's a great question. It's a great question, and I will not be answering it directly, but as I'm going through my, as I'm expositing on my convictions, I'm sure you can kind of get where I'm going with this. What you're actually asking her is, do you believe that a man's financial status is a definitive proxy for his capacity to maintain himself and by extension you over an extended period of time? Obviously, that extended period of time being a committed relationship. Now, for me, I just don't think it's, logical to assume that every man beneath a certain tax bracket shares a uniform capacity for investment. I'm not going to reduce human beings to a numerical shorthand. Even if, yes, those numbers might produce statistically positive correlations. Correlation is not ontology, you guys. Probability is not a dictating of a person's destiny. I will not evaluate your capacity to sustain, invest in, and maintain a relationship based on a single variable, no matter how persuasive the data may appear. That, to me, it's just not logical. To me, I just don't understand doing that. Human beings are not univariate equations, okay? They are composite systems. They are shaped by intersecting constraints, histories, dispositions, moments. Capacity must be assessed, in my opinion, case by case, not inferred irresponsibly and indiscriminately wholesale. To illustrate the danger of this reasoning, consider this example. If a man, for instance, has poor dental health, does that categorically mean that he will be an inattentive father? Does it guarantee that he will neglect cleanliness around the house? Of course not. And yet, statistical associations can be marshaled to suggest precisely that. Statistics are powerful, is what I'm saying, but they are not destiny. As a more triggering example, because I don't know, I'm feeling like causing a few fights around here, okay? I could reasonably correlate. Yes, I got it. I could correlate shorter male heights with certain markers of genetic deficiency, okay? I know I want to have children. I want to have lots of children. That's just me. And I could conclude, logically but falsely, that any woman's lack of aversion to short men is biologically irrational. I could do that. I'm a woman and I exist squarely in the exception class of that correlation. And to be completely clear, to be serious, I've never had an aversion to short men. I don't understand it. I didn't even know that it was a thing until I expressed to someone that I didn't get it, that I didn't mind. And we had an argument. It was, they thought I was insane. They thought I was weird. And I guess, I don't know, to some people, I don't know, maybe it's weird. But I think my point is made. This is the danger of statistical reasoning when it is not applied to the right domains. Now, this brings us to the language that should concern us most: deservingness.
The reason why I do not date around is because I don't deserve a girl. I don't deserve a wife. I am genuinely aware of that. I do not deserve one. So I'm letting that be. Like, I don't date around. I don't go looking for something I don't deserve. The moment you think you deserve a human being, you are controlling. You deserve a human being's time? No, you don't. I know that. I'm aware.
The idea, the principle that one must deserve access to love is, I think, much more exposing of our cultural conditioning than we care to admit. Everyone is working. Everyone is accumulating merit, degrees, titles, credentials, income. Jobs do not commit to you without proof of value, right? And so, almost imperceptibly, the same logic has been applied to this to the domain of intimate human relationships. But this extension is illegitimate, in my opinion. You know, something physical and inanimate, like a watch, right? That is, you bought it, you invested it, you invested money in it, and if you didn't like the product, you could return it, right? It's returnable. A job is conditional by design. A credential expires. Human beings do not operate under the same conditional grammar. If you order, like I said, like a watch, right, and it comes, anything really, if you order anything, but we'll stick with a watch. If you order a watch and it comes in the wrong color, you are completely justified in returning it. The logic is clean, transactional, appropriate. But if you have a child that does not possess the temperament, the appearance, or the personality that you hoped for, abandonment is absolutely not an option. Why? Because an object and a child do not hold the same category of value. Both may have been desired, both may have required investment, both may have come with reasonable expectations, but the conditions under which commitment may be withdrawn are radically different. You don't withdraw love from your withdrawn, in fact, you don't love your newborn child unconditionally, because they fulfilled some standard, or at least if that's the way you're thinking, if that's the way you operate, then please fix that for the sake of that child. You should love them because they are. Human beings, especially those bonded to us through intimacy, are not rewarded with affection for their performance. And if we forget this, the descent into abuse is, guys, it's alarmingly fast. Affection becomes leverage. Withdrawal becomes punishment. Love becomes a conditional reinforcement. That's what I'm saying. And if you have children and you think that way, like, oh my goodness, if you think your child should perform for your commitment to them, please, like, honestly, don't even have children. Do not have children, because those children will be emotionally abused. This, for me, is how I know a relationship has gone wrong, regardless of the role or the context. When someone says to me, you make me feel like, by your behavior, by your contempt, like I don't deserve you. The sentence is never about humility. It's about conditional belonging, and many of us reproduce this harm unintentionally because we're so busy performing constantly in modern life, and so we extend that logic onto people we claim to love. We believe that others are entitled to us or excluded from us solely based on these superficial performance metrics. That belief is definitively, in my opinion, but also just objectively, I think it's corrosive. So that's why I think Sybyl's death is not an accident. It is the natural endpoint, the natural result of conditional love. Progressing through the story, Dorian's soul rots, but his face remains untouched. And this, I think, is Oscar Wilde's most devastating insight. Society does not punish moral decay when it is paired with aesthetic beauty. Dorian remains admired, respected, protected, chosen, and yet there are those who, they look at him, they look at this guy and they're like, I don't know, something was off, something is not right, something is wrong, but they cannot articulate it, they cannot put their finger on it, and so they rationalize it instead. This is the privilege of attractiveness, right? You are granted ambiguity. You don't have to ask for it, you don't have to beg for it. People fight to defend you. There are people who will break their spines, bend over backwards, spend money, spend time, writing dissertations in comment sections defending your name just to explain away your harm, just to, goodness. It's insane, guys. It's actually insane. It's essentially the principle of attractiveness, or some measure of privilege you have, not erasing wrongdoing, but delaying recognition of what you've done wrong. And delay in moral life is often indistinguishable from exemption. The narrative accelerates from here, and yes, it darkens. Basil represents moral witness. He sees Dorian very, very clearly. He refuses aesthetic excuses, and he does not negotiate with beauty. And so what happens? Well, Dorian kills him. This is not the violence of access. This is the violence of maintenance. Basil threatens the only thing that Dorian cannot afford to lose: insulation. The insulation in specific that being beautiful, that being attractive provides. See, when reputation and appearance are put on at risk by the truth, the truth becomes entirely intolerable, offensive even. And so it must be eliminated. And this really does mirror modern relational dynamics. It does so, I think, with such frightening precision, because when relationships are built on conditional worth, exposure becomes literally existentially threatening. To be seen is to risk literally being disqualified. Dorian believes that he can escape the consequences of his actions by destroying the portrait, but as is quite obvious at this point, the issue is not the portrait. The issue is the record. It does not cause the corruption. It's preserving the evidence. And so when he stabs it, he actually stabs himself. And this is Oscar Wilde's final moral law, that you cannot outsource moral accounting indefinitely. The danger of beauty is not admiration. It is insulation from the feedback. Guys, for a long time, for my entire high school career, I did not think in extreme terms. Well, I didn't think in any terms about my appearance. Not because I was indifferent to it, but because I never believed it to be a stable currency. And I watched what happened to people who treated it as such. I didn't like what it did to them. I didn't like how little control they had over themselves in bearing witness, in dealing with what people thought of them. They completely just became what they weren't, and I didn't want that effect on me. I didn't want to lose control like that. Really, it scared me. I observed the anxiety, the distortion, the quiet panic, particularly when attention fluctuated, and I didn't like what I saw. I did not like what I saw, even with my female friends. When guys would just decide, like, I don't like you today, and they just couldn't deal with it. And I just thought, hey, I'm never giving anyone that power. And that was not a healthy way of dealing with it. Obviously, I'm an adult now. So yeah, in self-defense, I just told myself, like, hey, I'm not going to care, because if I don't care, you can't touch me. You literally, I thought, I don't know what I thought. It didn't work, guys, obviously. And then, of course, as I grew up, as I matured, I realized that, hey, I'm a woman. The way I look kind of does matter to some extent, especially romantically. I would like my partner to be attracted to me. Honestly, I realized that I do care, like a little bit. I do care, but still at the same time, I had to reconcile with the fact that, hey, these superficialities are depreciating over time. Attention migrates, desire decays. Beauty is never owned, it is actually socially leased, and the lease, you guys, is unforgiving. Even within religious frameworks, attractiveness is not a neutral thing. It's not a nothing kind of situation, especially in the church paired with charisma. I remember having a conversation, because I've always been so averse to objectification on both fronts, like men having their, thoughts, ideas, what I mean, as it concerns women. And obviously, as a reader, I encountered a lot of books where women would externalize their fantasies about men. And it repulsed me. It really repulsed me. And I was having a conversation with a friend, because, I was expressing how I don't like this whole, I don't even want to be looked at in that way. And they were like, well, do you want your your person to look at you completely neutrally? And I had to sit and really think about that question. And I realized that no, I don't. I have to, like, no, I don't. And I don't think anyone does, especially with certain exclusivities. You want, it's not saying that you want to be objectified, but you definitely want them to be you know attracted to you. You want that, I guess what I'm saying is you want the person you love to be able to appreciate your beauty. So I then realized that I couldn't go about society looking like, quite frankly, I fell out of I fell out of a tree. Okay, I couldn't. I had to do better, and I'm glad I did. Shame is, I think, sometimes a good thing. It's definitely, it's done something. It's forced me to make some strides. Okay, I guess, yeah. Anyway, I've noticed that even in religious frameworks, for me, the familiarity is with other Christians because, yeah, my faith is very important to me. So having these discussions with them has been really interesting, really enlightening. But yeah, even in these frameworks, attractiveness is not just a moral aesthetic. That's a difficult truth for a lot of people of faith, I find, to actually sit with, because perhaps vanity feels too adjacent to secularism, too entangled with ego. I personally don't share the discomfort. It is explicit to me, especially through autopsying some stories in the Old Testament, that attractiveness does carry moral and social consequence. I don't think the Bible shies away from that at all. For instance, Saul, Israel's first king, he is introduced as both handsome and imposing. In fact, the word used in my Bible is comely. I know, because I thought, wow, this is an exquisite term to describe a man who takes good care of himself. Anyway. It says, I think, something along the lines of, from the shoulders upward, he was taller than any of the people. You can find it. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think it's 1 Samuel 9 verse 2. Anyway, in a population we appreciate that was shorter than most modern averages, Saul's stature alone would have definitely conferred authority. His appearance granted him legitimacy long before wisdom had been practically demonstrated in a kingly role. And that is precisely the danger. Esther as well, she was explicitly beautiful, and that is why the king ends up noticing her. But her beauty is not framed as entitlement. It's actually framed as a test. She is not called to leverage her attractiveness for comfort or for safety, but rather to risk annihilation on behalf of a people that she well could have abandoned. Beauty grants access. Beauty allows you to inhabit certain spaces where, yes, you have significant influence, especially if you are permitted into, stations of regality, stations of visibility, because people look up to you. But this does not absolve rather responsibility. And then we have the personhood of Christ. We appreciate that he did not arrive adorned, flashy, in your face with, the visible majesty of the incredible divinity of God. No, in fact, he chose the complete opposite. Isaiah is unambiguous. This is in where is it? I think it's Isaiah 53 verse 2. He had no form or majesty that we should look at him, and no beauty that we should desire him. God incarnate chooses an unremarkable appearance. Why would he do that? The decision is not incidental, in my opinion. I think it is. I mean, obviously many would say that it is theological, but to me, it may even have been strategic. I think God knows how we are. I mean, that assures that truth is not mistaken for charm and superficial aesthetics. When the logics of deservingness are applied to human beings, I think something quite grotesque occurs, and it is something that Christ came explicitly to redeem us from. Few phrases have been more unhelpful to me than this one. Catherine, you didn't deserve it. There's nothing you could have done to prevent what is happening to you, what has happened to you. I know it hurts, but you didn't deserve it. And thinking about that situation, I mean, I struggle not to feel like I would feel like, gosh, I wish I had deserved it, because then at least prevention would feel controllable. Pulling that against this discussion, your appearance is not controllable. If someone doesn't like you because of the way you look, because of the way you came out of the womb, okay, in this day and age, we now have plastic surgery, so people are doing insane things. But say it's something you really cannot control, like your race, your culture, your whatever, I don't know, whatever it happens to be. When someone has contempt for a quality about you can't control, it's absolutely horrible, because if you could control it, at least then responsibility would offer you some leverage, some way of changing things. Christ's love refuses that framework, that logic of deservedness. Knowing that I didn't deserve it, knowing that there was absolutely nothing that I could have done or not done to incentivize him to love me more or less. I know it's a funny thing to even say out loud, but it makes love for me difficult to accept, and I'm glad God knows that. I'm glad that we're working on that together. But yeah, I don't know. It's a difficult kind of security to just sit in and accept, and I think it's having that analytical brain, having to constantly ask why. It shouldn't be logically that hard a love to accept. But to be honest with you, it's the only type of love I'm willing to replicate. I've learned in taking accountability that there's not something just internally corrosive, but actually collectively contagious about resisting affection that we do not understand, that our overly analytical brains cannot wrap themselves around, especially so when that resistance is rooted in a sense of undeservedness. When love feels unfair, unearned, or asymmetrical, because what follows is simple yet inevitable. If you assess yourself through metrics of unworthiness, those metrics quietly govern the way you assess others. It's naive, I think, to believe that you can sever your estimation of your own humanity from your estimation of other people's humanity. Your humanity, exposed, imperfect, recurring daily, is the primary template through which you interpret the value of others. And what you believe about yourself in your most undeserving form, in your most unattractive form, will undeniably surface in how you love others in their most undeserving form, in their most unattractive form. And that's, I think, something we need to be cautiously aware of, especially when we're looking at people and who deserves our time, our attention, our patience, and what we feel entitled to, also as a result of how much work we've put in. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Anyways, that's all I have for you guys today. I will see you hopefully very soon. Yeah, you take care and goodbye.